A one and a two and a chick-a-boom a chick.
Welcome, everybody, to this Remodelers on the Rise podcast. You're probably listening to it via podcast, but for those of you who are seeing us, we're also on video today. I'm Kyle Hunt, and today I have a very special guest, a VSG, if you will. It stands for Very Special Guest, Vicki Suter. Hi, Vicki.
Hello, Kyle.
Thank you for joining us today. And I was going to just do a quick bio so that everybody knows who Vicki is, and then we're going to get into our main topic of this podcast, which is specifically for construction companies, remodelers, builders, on this topic of pricing. Very interesting topic of pricing. So let me introduce Vicki. Vicki Suter, she helps people see their businesses differently, then gives them the tools to do things differently. I like how you wrote that, by the way. Since beginning her business in 1990, Vicki has helped hundreds of contracting companies achieve the kind of success they never dreamed possible. Today, in addition to consulting, Vicki is an in-demand speaker at industry conferences nationally and internationally, where her presentations are consistently ranked among the most popular. Vicki's articles and opinions have been widely shared in print and across the web. And Vicki, tell me, and before we hit the recording button, I told you I was going to ask you this. I read that and I'm like, nationally and internationally, and I was just so curious, like, have you been to Europe? Have you been to Australia? Where have you spoken internationally?
Oh, I was going to say I've been to Europe, but no, I have not spoken in Europe. Canada, I've spoken in Canada. Yeah.
International speaker.
International speaker in Canada.
I like it. All right, good enough. Good enough. All right, so you have a new book coming out, or based on when people are listening to this, probably out, called The Profit Bleed, and we'll talk about that later. And you sent me over several different topics. Hey, Kyle, we could do a little podcast about this, about that, about this. And as I reviewed that list, I thought, you know what, let's talk about pricing. Pricing is such a critical component to running a successful contracting remodeling business. There's so much that hinges on it, right? We can offer exceptional service, exceptional work. We can, sell. We can close a lot of business. If we are not closing it profitably, if we are not producing it profitably, we do all of this work, and we see it consistently as coaches and consultants in this industry, and we kind of end up at the end going, where'd the money go? Why isn't there more at the end of this? And so much of it kind of goes back. Yes, of course, be more efficient in production. Yes, of course, this or that. But a lot of it can go back to how we are pricing our services as kind of the hinge point. So I'd love to kind of dig into that. We can talk numbers, gross profit. We can talk about markup and margin and selling price and all of that. So that's our topic today. So to get rock and rolling with that, we're going to ask the first question, which is, what are the biggest mistakes you and your work see contractors make regarding pricing?
Before I kind of launch into that, I just want to add to what you just said, and maybe just say it in a little bit of a different way, in that when you're bidding is the very first place that you are making or losing money. So super important concept, really. And I know people are always trying to make sure that they're that they've got everything in their scope when they're estimating a project, and that they're marking up. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about markups, but marking up to make a profit. But oftentimes what happens is they don't actually know their real numbers for overhead and profit, and particularly overhead. So a lot of times when I always ask this question actually when I first start working with somebody, and I say, do you know what your overhead break-even percentage is? And they'll say, sometimes they say yes, a lot of times they say no. And when they say yes, 90% of the time, the number that they're using is the number off of their profit and loss statement. And that is not your overhead break-even percentage. And if you use that percentage on the profit and loss statement, you'll actually lose money.
So explain, just break that out a little bit.
Yeah, let me just break that out a little bit. So when you look at a profit and loss statement, you have numbers that are your revenue, your cost of goods sold, the cost for running your business, and then your net profit. And then oftentimes when you see a profit and loss report, you'll also see percentages next to those numbers. And those numbers represent a percentage of revenue. And I wish I would have actually had, I had an example the other day for a recording I was doing about this, that the profit and loss
on your, as you've been going around and doing your press tour.
Yeah.
Another interview.
But it said 23% next to overhead costs that represented the cost for them to run their business, right? Their overhead percentage. And what I did is I actually explained to them, well, the 23% represents that as a percentage of revenue. That's not how you calculate your overhead break-even percentage. That is a completely different formula. So the formula for calculating your overhead break-even percentage takes your overhead costs and it divides it by your cost of goods sold. Now, usually I do this for at least a year period of time, and oftentimes I'll look at it year to year for like a 5-year trend. But particularly, if I'm bidding for this year, I'm going to take either my budget for this year or last year's overhead break-even percentage and use that as the number that I know I need to mark up just to break even. And in the example that I just gave, where overhead on the profit and loss statement showed 23%, the overhead break-even percentage was actually closer to 37%.
It's a big difference.
That's a huge difference, and that's 14 percentage points where oftentimes that's where you're losing your money. No, and I, the thing that
we went down that rabbit hole a little bit, but even getting back to like the biggest mistakes, what are the key things that you're seeing?
That is one of the biggest mistakes that people make, is that they do not have a clear idea of what their overhead break-even percentage is. And one of the things that I say is, in 37% sounds like a lot, right? You mean like, so people go, oh my gosh, like I can't show that on my bids. And there's different ways that you can do that. And without going into a lot of detail here on that part, what I'll say is that the mistake that people make is that they don't understand what the real cost is for doing business. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the places. The other place is in the cost of labor, understanding what's the real completely burdened cost of having that employee for not only gross wages, but taxes, workers' comp, benefits, vacation, holidays, if your liabilities based on your employees, if you're union, all of the union benefits, and then there's things like cell phone and cars and so on and so forth, trucks. So understanding the fully burdened number and including that as your basis for cost within your bids is going to start to stack the odds in your favor of making sure that you're making money on those projects. And labor's your biggest risk, right? Labor's your biggest variable. So, and that's why I point out labor specifically, because it's a number that you got to keep updated.
Sure. So even those are some good reminders. Something that comes to my mind as you're going through there is, when I think of biggest mistakes made in pricing, is kind of one of the things you shared, which is just having clarity on what our costs, what our costs related and the job is, what our expenses are to run the business, and then digging in enough to even realize that when I'm looking at my profit and loss statement, okay, I got that amount in there. Well, guess what? If you're paying a installment payment, or if you're paying like a credit card payment, guess what? That actually doesn't usually show up on the profit and loss statement, right? So you have to really dig in and truly understand. The thing I've been saying more and more lately is I see so many of my remodeling clients who I can explain their profit and loss. Now, I have an advantage because I look at a lot of profit and loss statements, but I can explain their profit and loss statement head and shoulders better than they can explain their profit and loss statement. And I understand that it's not their specialty. I understand that it's something that is hard to grasp and understand. But my emphasis there is, if you want to price right, you really need to understand your numbers well. You need to understand what it costs to run your business. You need to understand that there's a difference between gross profit and net profit. You've got to study it. You've got to dig into it.
Well, and here's why is, so I'm going to add two things to what you said, because I completely agree with you on everything that you said. One is when you look at what it costs to run your business, in addition to understanding where your profits are also going to paying debt and credit cards and so on, but that your overhead costs need to include a salary for you as a principal. A lot of sole proprietors like kind of think of whatever money's left over is what they get. And when you calculate that overhead break-even percentage, it needs to include your salary as a principal. Super important. That's the only way you're going to be able to build a sustainably successful, profitable business. The other thing about like about knowing your profit and loss statement, I think it goes one step way further than that, which is when you have a relationship with your numbers, you have more clarity about what the reality is of your business. And when you have more clarity, you have more confidence that lets you actually make decisions in a more powerful, certain way about, when you're in a conversation and somebody says, well, Joe down the street is 10 and 5 for his markups, or 15 and 10, or whatever those numbers are that they throw around.
Right. Or even without even getting there, it's just a homeowner saying, you're just a lot more expensive than the other guy.
Right. Yeah, which then gets into a whole thing on the sales side of it.
Right.
But in terms of the pricing side of it, and even dealing with that conversation with the homeowner, what I have found over the years is that when my clients are super clear about their numbers, because numbers don't lie, when you're really clear about your numbers and you're grounded in it, you have a significantly more confidence in your ability to have a conversation with a client about what's included and why does it cost that much. Right. As you always talk about, that's part of our job is to educate them. And when you're really clear, it's much easier. So I'm just saying I would take the another step was it's really not is it a good practice as a business owner? Should you? Yes, of course. But the more powerful thing is that when you're super clear about your numbers, you have more confidence. And when you have more confidence, you make more powerful decisions.
There is a direct relationship between the top 10, 15, 20% of remodelers and contractors out there that the biggest thing that is unifying, everybody does it differently, right? But the biggest commonality is they all understand their numbers. I was sitting was talking to one of my clients. I won't say that they were sitting across the table this morning because that would narrow down who I was talking to by a couple people. But I was talking to a salesperson that came to have some coaching this morning, and he's running the division of the business. And when we talk about pricing, when we talk about financials, when we talk about how much were you expecting to make in gross profit versus the actual, I started going down that road because I kept hearing him say, well, I'm trying to sell things at a fair price. And that just jumped off at me going, fair price. Okay. And who is he referring to when it comes to a fair price? A fair price for the business he works for? No.
Right.
A fair price to the homeowner. Right. And what you're getting at there is so true, which is the clearer you are on what you truly need in order to run and operate the business, it changes the conversation from, well, I can't sell that much, or maybe I should sell more, to I need to. If I'm going to be profitable, I need to sell at this markup or at this margin in order to pay all my bills, in order for all of this stinking work I'm putting in the business to actually pay a good wage, to actually have a net profit, to actually, right? So understanding so I would put a bow, and then we'll move on to the next question, a bow on this of you just have to understand your numbers. The more you understand the numbers, the more clear you will be on where you need to price your goods, and the more confident you're going to be in running your business. You want to put a cherry on top of the bow?
Perfect. Nope.
No?
Good.
Okay. No cherry? No, just a bow? No. Okay. All right. Good. See, if you're listening to the podcast, you have to look this up on YouTube because I'm like tying a bow and you put a little cherry on top. All right. All right. So we were going down a little road there, and then we veered that. But the next question I had was, when we do figure out what to price our services at, okay, I need to be at this markup, this margin. However, some people like to use margin. I prefer actually markup. I think it's just clear and simple. But maybe I'm just a clear and simple guy. I don't know. But when we say, okay, we need to charge X amount, or this is our selling price, and we get that resistance from the people that we're selling to, how do you suggest people overcome pricing objections?
Well, a lot of it is part of what we just talked about a second ago, which is being really clear about your numbers. The other thing has to do with educating people. And, one of the things that I recommend, because people always say, like, well, I can't sell it for a 36, in the example I was giving earlier, a 36% markup. And I say, well, then what you got to do is you got to build it into your numbers in a way that shows on your bid those overhead costs as line items, either in general requirements or in your labor number. As I was talking about, there's a lot of overhead costs that's actually related to your labor number. How do you make sure to demonstrate that? And I believe that it's an education process, first of all. But even backing up from that, and I, your specialty is sales, and you would probably agree with that, is that you need to have a sales process that you have written out, that you follow when from the time somebody calls you, the phone rings, or you get that email, right? Until the point where you actually have a signed contract. You should have an entire sales process that outlines how do you, what are the questions that you want to know to get a really clear idea of where is the pain point for somebody. Even when somebody calls and they say, well, I want to remodel my kitchen. Well, there's something that is a pain point for them about wanting to remodel their kitchen. I promise you, even if all they want to talk about is all the great stuff they want to have in there. Because human beings, intrinsically, we do not like change. And we only change or take a different action or do a different behavior if there are three conditions usually in place. One is there's some major catastrophe or breakdown. My house burned down and I have to build a new house. Some level of dissatisfaction, unhappiness, problem, issue, challenge, whatever you want to call it, right? And that can come in lots of different varieties that you keep banging up against the same problem over and over again. And maybe for some of the people listening, it's profitability or being able to be effective in their sales.
I don't know if you could hear that, but like right when you said it could be like your house burning down, there was a fire truck that went by just outside there.
Oh, okay.
Be careful what you say, because evidently what you say instantly turns into reality in the real world. So just, I know, just think about that before you say the next thing. Because the third way, yeah.
So the third thing is that if there is a highly desired state that is unfulfilled. So one of those conditions is usually the thing that has us get motivated to take action. So when you can understand really clearly about where the pain point is for the customer, then before you go to solution, because it's always what we want to do, right? We're problem solvers. We want to go to solution. Before you go there, then you find out very specifically where they would like to go. And your sales process and your questions should go in this order, right? You're finding out where the pain is. You're finding out what they would like and getting very specific with them about what they would like. And then your solution is a way to fill the gap. And if you are in part of the process of doing this and having a sales process, what it does is it allows you to build trust. It allows you to build confidence. And you do something really powerful for the customer by asking specific questions, which is why I like a written sales process, is that you help them get clear for themselves. Just like we were talking about a minute ago about the numbers, that really when I approach a sales conversation, my goal is to help that person get clear about what they really need and get clear about what's the best way to get there. But I always start with, let's talk about where you are now and then where you want to go, because then we can really identify what's the fastest path to get from where you are to where you want to be. By the way, and you probably, I think you talk about this, Kyle, too, is when you have a sales process and you have it written down and you're like, you kind of got a system for it, you're going to find that you get people to make decisions faster and who will trust you more because they feel more empowered in their engagement with you because you helped them have a greater sense of clarity.
Right. It also ties into you're more confident, similar to even the first thing of pricing, more confident we are. So if I were to summarize the kind of how do we overcome pricing objections, if I were to kind of put in my own words, what you were saying is the more value we build in the process, the more value we show in how we work, the more clarity we bring to our proposals, and the different phases, if you need to raise your prices, or if you need to charge more in order to run a profitable business, a lot of times what that means is you need to build up the value of what you offer, right? Is a huge part of what you're saying there. Awesome.
Right.
So this question is kind of a test for you, because you write. I'm guessing I haven't written a book yet, but you write content and then you're like, oh, did I say that? So this is almost like a test, because I was reading the first couple chapters of your book, and in your book you said there are only 2 ways to increase profitability. What are those 2 ways? Let's catch ball one.
Actually,
I could have really dug in and found a difficult one.
Perfect, because there's only 2 ways to affect the bottom line: increase revenue or decrease costs. That's it. There's only 2 ways to do either of those things. The only 2 ways to increase revenue are literally sell more, or that you actually increase your prices. You either sell more or you mark up more. There's only 2 ways to reduce expenses. You either spend less money or you become more efficient in production. And when you can, like, I'm always about what's the simplest.
I don't want to throw you off, but on your podcast, most of you can click a button and you can rewind 15 seconds. Hit that twice. Listen to what Vicki just said a couple times, because it's such a simple truth, but it's such a powerful truth. Yeah. Wait a minute. How do I become more profitable? There's 2 ways, and there's 2 things under each of them. Just rewind it. Listen to it a couple times. Hope I didn't throw you off. Carry on, Vicki.
No, good. What you just said was exactly what I was about to say, which is, if you understand the simplicity of it, all of a sudden it just removes a lot of the extraneous, like, I'm worried, I'm concerned, am I supposed to do this, am I supposed to do that? It's like, if you're grounded in your numbers and you understand that there's only 2 ways to affect the bottom line, it's like, then you go, okay, where's my issue? Where's my challenge? Where is it that I need to look? And there's a thought that just keeps on occurring to me as we're talking, so I just have to say this. One of the things that I said is a way to reduce cost, which increases your profits, is to become more efficient in production. And back to the original question that you asked, because so many times I see people when they're bidding who go, we'll make it up in production. You never make it up in production. Right.
That's like your customer saying, oh, we'll make our selections as we go. We'll keep it in line. No, it always ends up.
It's a nightmare then, right? Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Good. Next question. What process do you recommend contractors have in place in order to make sure they are bidding to meet their gross profit margin goals?
That's a good question. So when you're bidding, I recommend that before you...
Vicki, it's a good question, and you actually sent it over to me, because you are like the greatest interviewee of all time, where you're like, Kyle, here's some questions. Like, my job is so easy. Do you see? I'm just like sipping coffee. I'm just asking the questions that you sent over to me. So thank you for the good question. You're welcome. Like, I came up with that good question, but come on, let's be real.
You'd have asked it though. I recommend that before you ever show a contract to a client, well, first of all, I recommend that if you're in business and you're in the contracting business, which most of your, if not all of your listeners are, that you need to have a gross profit margin goal for your business. And before you send out bids, making sure that all of those bids are at or above your gross profit margin goal. If you want to, produce a certain profitability, you got to have a certain, contractors live and die by margin. So an inconsistent margin, or a margin, people who say, I'm going to just do more volume and I can lower my prices. I watched a company go from $3 million a year and $250,000 profits. Actually, they came to me after this next thing happened. They went to $15 million in sales and they lost $250,000 because they had this mindset of, I'll just sell more at cheaper prices and I'll make it up for it in volume. Well, their overhead went out of the roof, that much volume, and they got very efficient.
Playing high stakes poker.
So the thing is, set a goal for gross profit margin and then manage for it. And the way that you manage for it, the very first thing is make sure that before those bids go out, that you check the margin for jobs by taking the bid price less your costs, equals your gross profit. Divide that gross profit by your bid price. That will give you your margin. And margin by definition, just to throw this in here, margin by definition is simply a percentage, and it's what I call the great equalizer. So no matter how much your volume goes up or down, if you manage to a percentage and to a gross profit margin, that margin should not change unless you grow exponentially in the size of projects, in which case your margins will usually get a little bit lower.
Sure. Good. A couple of things. I was typing a couple like summary statements that I'm hearing as we're going through these. Of you said grounded in numbers, decisions that are grounded in numbers, knowing your expenses. As I maybe transition a little bit to you talking about the book, educating yourself. It's funny for the people that are on the video part. You can see this. It's a so right now you might not be able to read that. It says it's backwards too. It says marketing, sales / on the business. It's a little device thing that I've got all the different categories of how I spend my time. And right now I'm doing marketing, sales on the business. I'm recording a podcast that is more my on the business time. And when I have it on here, it connects to an app and it tracks that. But I have it is neat. That's why I showed it, just because it's a new gadget that's neat.
And you could see it correctly.
Okay.
From the viewer's point of view.
Gotcha. It's also been, I've been recording it's going to be very interesting to see over the course of a month, but it's been very interesting and convicting to me of how much time I'm actually working versus like checking social media, checking the news, putzing on this. It's been very interesting. But there's a section, the little category that I have of just reading and education, like true education. I think if everybody tracked their time of how much time they actually spend getting better at their at learning and time they're doing, even listening to this podcast, that fits that category of trying to learn something new. It's such a small percentage of the time. So in order to be grounded in your numbers, in order to know your expenses, in order to know what your pricing should be, in order to understand what even you just got into of gross margin, you've got to dig into it. You've got to study it. You've got to call your CPA and say, hey, we've been working together for a few years. Can we just sit down for an hour? And even if it's just basics, like walk me through the profit and loss statement, total sales minus cost of goods sold. Should I include some of my salary? Just dig into it, lean into it. So often when it comes to financials and numbers, especially if you're not making money, the tendency is to bury your head in the sand and lean away from it. You've got to lean into it because, as some people say, the profit bleeds. It bleeds out, right?
Nice segue, Kyle.
Good book title. The profit bleed. What is that actually, when you came up with that title, what does that actually mean to you, like the profit bleed?
Well, it's one of the things that I talk about a lot about is where are the places where profits get made and lost in your business. And I'm making a circle because I have this diagram that I actually go over with people a lot in terms of understanding where profits are seeping out of your business. And it had a lot of iterations before it actually got to that final title. But really what it's about is where are you bleeding profits? Because the subtitle of the book is How Managing Margin Can Save Your Contracting Business. So it's all about, it's written for contractors, and it's written specifically to understand where your profits are bleeding, where you're bleeding margin, and where are the ways that you can get better control of that and stop the bleed.
Love it. Cool. Where can they go if they want to snag a copy?
Well, if you're listening to this, when are you going to record? When are you putting up this podcast?
Well, Vicki, I am so professional and polished with my production calendar. Let me look at my production calendar here. I would say 2 weeks-ish.
Okay.
So yeah, it's probably out. Let's say it's out.
Yeah, so 2 weeks. So they can go to theprofitbleed.com, and that'll take you to the book sales page that will give you a link for being able to make a purchase. You could also always go to Amazon, but if you go to the sales page, you'll get some freebie extra stuff.
Okay, love it. All right, and then a final question or two. What is one thing every person listening to this podcast or watching us on YouTube, what can they do right now that is super simple to get a better handle on their numbers?
I love your idea about meeting with your CPA, but the really short, simple one is go calculate your overhead break-even percentage.
Okay. And if they don't know how to do that, they can probably find it in your book, right?
They can find it in my book. Actually, one of the cool things about the book is that in every chapter, I reference different tools that will help people implement what I'm talking about in that particular chapter. And the book is actually written as a fable because I kind of loved that format of telling a story, because stories are really powerful ways to communicate information. And so at the end of each chapter, I make a distinction of what did we put in place in that business, and then where can you get those tools. So people who buy the book will have access to resources that are not otherwise available on my website. So I give them tools for being able to do things like calculate overhead break-even percentage. In a sales process, I actually give you an outline for a sales process.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So you've been at this since 1990. Do you still love doing this stuff?
I do. I love working with contractors. You know, contractors are some of the smartest people that I know, and they don't give themselves nearly enough credit, super hardworking. And what I love is when I can like turn the lights on for them about how to get more control over their bottom line and how to have more freedom and joy in their life in the way in teaching them how to run their business. And it really is, a lot of it is based on if you can run it and manage it by results and by specific measurables, you're going to find that you have lots more peace of mind and you're able to grow teams and move away from being tethered to your business day to day. I love that. It is part of the reason that I was put here. It's part of the reason I wrote the book. I truly believe that this is my life's work. And so I love seeing the transformation that happens for people.
If it's not your life's work, you know, you better
move on. It is part of my life's work.
I was going to say, if it's your life's work, you better move on to something else. I mean, you got a good 28 years into it. It better be your life's work at this point.
It's part of, it's part of it. Yeah. I also happen to love to cook. So I do this cooking and leadership course too, which is a whole nother, gives me creative.
What else don't we know about Vicki? Give us one
I
more
wrote a
thing.
cookbook. Yeah. And I do that.
Did you write a cookbook?
I did. I wrote a cookbook with my mom.
What is that called?
It's called Manja, I Love You. Manja, exclamation mark, dash. Well, if you look it up, it's Manja dash, I Love You. It's a compilation of family recipes and that go back several generations back to Italy. And, I'm Italian, and when we feed people, it's an expression of love. And so I several years ago, actually early 90s, I said to my mom, let's write a book. Let's get these recipes, on paper. And I'm super glad I did, because cool. The older generation of my family is gone. So
that is cool. So pick up that when you're on Amazon as well.
Yeah, there you go.
It was a thought that came to my mind of when you just said, just breaking bread. Having a meal is just the thought that came to my mind was, there might be some contractors listening to this. They're like, man, as far as a CPA goes, like that costs money. Man, I just wish I could try to wrap my head around. Like it was helpful listening to what you guys were saying. Finding a contractor, or especially with the internet, man, there's so many people that are willing to help. That's another thing I love about our industry is that people are willing to help. Like in saying, hey, can I buy, I call it a BLB, breakfast, lunch, or beer. Can I buy you breakfast? Can I buy you lunch and just pick your brain? Find somebody around you that really, man, they know their numbers inside and out. How do you do that? What did you read? How did you study that? Can you teach me? There's resources out there. Don't feel defeated in this. I think if I were to kind of put a summary on just this topic, it is to anybody listening to it, even if you feel like you have a good handle on your numbers, there's another level, another 2 levels of analyzing your numbers, understanding your numbers. And then there's a whole lot of you who are listening to this that are kind of just okay, if not really good at knowing your numbers. And hear it from Vicki. You've been doing this for 28 years in this industry. I'm 10 years in. We coach, we consult remodeling and contracting business owners. I think you would agree with this. If not, then you can not agree. But such a critical point of success versus failure is just understanding your numbers. It's hard work. This business is complicated. There's so many balls you're juggling, but understanding your numbers is such a critical component. Set goals every single month. How can I get better at knowing my numbers, understanding my numbers? It's such a key to success.
It is. And the only thing I would add to it is it will give you more control over your business, your bottom line, and your life.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Vicki, for joining us.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
You bet. Good luck on your book. I have tens of thousands of listeners, so I think single-handedly the Remodelers on the Rise podcast will drive thousands of book sales, make you a bestseller. You may even go I think I have one fan in Australia. Maybe you can go truly international. Maybe you go speak.
Oh, there you go.
Well, thanks for joining us, and
right.
We will talk to you again soon. Thanks, everybody, for listening. So usually here at the end of the podcast, I have some type of, hey, here's my private Facebook group, or leave a review for me, or some kind of little ask. And all I have for you today is to take some action on something you heard. You heard my kind of summary statement of this interview loud and clear. We have to understand our numbers. You have to understand your profit and loss statement. You need to dig into your job cost reporting, know what your kind of expected versus actual was. You need to understand what you need to be pricing your services at. When you're able to do that, your confidence as a business owner skyrockets. Your ability to figure out the sales process and techniques that you need to implement in order to sell at the desired markup or margin starts to crystallize and come into focus. So that's my big thing at the end here. Take action on something here. Maybe it's setting up a meeting with a CPA. Maybe it's setting up a meeting with somebody on your team. Maybe it's with your bookkeeper. Maybe it's with a, like I mentioned at the end there, a remodeler who you respect and you can pick their brain. Dig into your numbers, understand them, ask lots of questions, get better. Hope you're having a great day. Keep working hard.